As you may have picked up in the video, it can be a messy business, and you can read this slide yourself because it's self-explanatory, except perhaps for the last bit, grounding theory, which was mentioned as a tradition in qualitative research. And essentially the idea is this, that when we look at the data, rather than impose our own structure initially, we let the respondents speak for themselves. We let the theory come out of the response. It's emergent. And that's what grounding theory means. Let's have a look at the key stages that you're going to have to go through. Firstly, key thing is you may have a lot of data and you've got to reduce it. And this means looking at it all and trying to put it into kind of baskets, if you like, what are often referred to as categories. And we may use a coding system to do this, but we're trying to get that data into more manageable, identifiable key activities relating to our purpose. For example, if we're looking at the flip, there's likely to be, certainly related to the online component, data that relates to being able to understand the content. Maybe if you are providing feedback activities, then data relating to the effectiveness or otherwise of those feedback activities. And eventually, with this, we've got to display it in some form, and we know that this can go into tables, charts, etc. So you've got to look at the best, most ergonomic and valid way of presenting this information. So the data display is something that you will build up as you go through this data reduction process. And finally, perhaps the most exciting part of it, as you start to put the data together, you start looking for patterns and make certain inferences about possible explanations about what they mean. But it's tremendously important in doing the data analysis is to test your interpretations and the kind of conclusions that you might be moving towards. And that's where it's important to go back to the data, because what's crucial, as we'll see later in the tutorial, that the interpretations you make, the claims to knowledge that you make, the questions that you then put forward for further research must ultimately be grounded in the data you've got. And if they're not, essentially they may be seen to be quite spurious. And lots of research has been criticised on those grounds, where writers maybe have a particular value stance, value judgment, and they kind of look for the data that supports that. And when it doesn't, it does lead to the reader being quite suspicious about where you're going with the research. How do you derive these key categories? Well, as we've noted, they may actually come from the terminology of the respondents themselves. If students keep using terms like in relation to, say, an online component, the person who was managing it was very uninterested or very interested, that the term itself, uninterested, interested person, may actually be an organising category because it's reflecting the language, the perception of those respondents. Sometimes we might want to use our own constructs because they're very familiar and they've emerged as consistent analytical categories. For example, when we talk about online learning, a well-established category or theme is that of presence, and that is the student's experience of you being online. What kind of presence do you have? Is it a supporting presence? Is it visible? How does it support the learning, or perhaps does it support the learning? And finally, just to reinforce the point that the categories should, in fact must, relate to the intended meanings of respondents. So this is a judgment call, and the people that read your research paper will make their own judgments about how well your interpretations, recommendations, findings are actually substantiated by the methodology that you've used and the data that you've produced. So it's really important to try to get the best calibration here, and the best way to do that is to go back to the original data and check it against these emerging categories and the interpretations that you're making. So there's a bit of a meaty overview for you.